So I'm Dave Walstow. I'm the Client Services Director at Creed Communications, and I'm here today to talk to you about paper performance media and what we're calling a revolution in talent attraction. Now, whilst I remember, if you stick around to the end of this session, which I'm hoping you do, we've got a prize draw that we'll be running, and I'll give details about how you can enter that and what you can win. But further ado, the purpose of today, keeping it nice and simple to 3 reasons that I hope you'll stick around, which is to save money, is to save time, and hopefully save some blushes as well. So that's what we're going to be covering off today. So why we're here, and hopefully why you're here. Now this, I'm gonna be honest, I've made some assumptions as to why you, the people attending this session are joining today. I'm making an assumption that you may be here because you want to modernize how you are buying your media at the moment, your recruitment media. You potentially want to save both time and money in that area. Who doesn't, I suppose? You're intrigued as to what the revolution is, as we've coined it, or quite simply, this sounded the best of the sessions that were on at this time and you're here for that reason, which is fair enough. Happy with that. So, a brief history, as I'm calling it, of recruitment advertising. So I thought useful here to kind of set the context of this presentation and where I'm hoping to take everybody today. So I can only really go back as long as I've been in the industry. So I've been working in recruitment advertising or employer branding, whatever we want to call it, for about 12, 13 years now. And when I first joined, it was all print. Everybody did print advertising and there was an awful lot of money spent there. And I guess the biggest revolution after that was that everything was about job boards. So all of a sudden you had all your generics popping up, but then there was 1,000,001 niche job boards popping up, and that was where everyone's money transitioned to. And that at the time was a huge revolution. Then it was Google. So there was, before even Google for Jobs, there was Google Ads, or AdWords as it was called, Google Ads as it is now. And that's still obviously important, but there was a big shift in budget from people using job boards to getting ahead of the job boards and getting to candidates as soon as they hit that Google search. Then it was Indeed. Indeed, as you know, you're probably all using Indeed or certainly aware of Indeed. Indeed was everything. Everybody's been putting everything on Indeed, whether it was scrape for free or whether you're sponsoring your jobs. Indeed was definitely the next big step in recruitment advertising and media. Then, which I'll talk about a little bit later today, passive programmatic advertising came about. So this would be advertising to people who aren't necessarily looking for jobs, and that you were just trying to get in front of the right people with a brand message to grab their attention. And that certainly kind of was as a next step as we've seen it. And then at the moment, there's been a rise in kind of paper performance channels. So what I mean by those are your likes of ZipRecruiter. Indeed is obviously one, AdZuna, JobRapido, Talent.com. There's an awful lot of those that are popping up that you are probably hearing of, but aren't necessarily or may not necessarily have used just yet. So I think that helps set a bit of a scene as to where we are at the moment or where things have come from. Now, meanwhile, in the world of consumer marketing, they, in my view, have always been ahead of recruitment advertising at every step. So they transitioned away from print advertising well before we did, and they didn't really have a job board equivalent. You could argue comparison sites are maybe a somewhat of an equivalent, but certainly not for all sectors. So they didn't have a job board kind of step to go to. Instead, they transitioned to programmatic display advertising years and years and years ago, to the point where last year they spent, all businesses spent over £8 billion in the UK on programmatic advertising alone, which incidentally dwarfed what was spent on TV, outdoor, radio. So it's by far the biggest channel of advertising that's happening in product advertising. And those organizations and those agencies knew that reaching passive talent, especially online, was going to be key after, traditional leafleting and TV and radio, that actually it was online where advertising needed to go. So before we talk about what we're actually here to talk about, the revolution and paper performance media, I just wanted to bust some myths about programmatic. I'm going to just speak quite candidly here, which is I watch and see and hear an awful lot of presentations and people talking about programmatic. Some I agree with, some I don't, some are confusing, some aren't. I just want to give kind of our view on it and try and simplify it as best I can, because this word will be used a lot, but I do want to mention this is not a presentation on programmatic advertising. So what is programmatic advertising? Just to set the scene, simply put, it's the automated buying and selling of advertising. It's a piece of software or a company that runs that software that once you know your audience, it goes away and finds them and learns from it. Simply put, that's it. There's a bid system that goes on and it works it all out itself. Now, what programmatic enables organizations to do in the passive space is you can predefine your audience. So you can say, I want to look for this, it could be this gender, it could be this location, it could be has an interest in X, and it will just serve adverts to those people wherever they are online. You only pay for ads that are delivered, but more importantly, that are clicked on. So you're paying for performance there. You can pick your time of day or your day of the week, which means that you can look at where conversion tends to be best and just advertise then. But more importantly, you're choosing the audience, not the website that you're advertising on. Traditionally, you would say, I want to put a banner on The Guardian, for example. Now, The Guardian could be where your audience visits, but they could also be visiting 100 other websites and you'll be able to reach them there as well. Now, this meant the approach changed in that kind of space. So it went from, I'm going to buy banners on the IT job board, to I'd like my adverts to be seen by females living in London who have an interest in IT. So again, you can see the targeting has become massively more sophisticated than it used to be. And this is, you know, in the recruitment space only over the last kind of 4 or 5 years. And it's almost this machine learning and as removed kind of the mundane process of I need to call The Guardian, book a banner, say I want it to run for 2 weeks, get performance on that. This just takes out all of that manual process and goes and finds those people very quickly, very sophisticatedly, and learns as it goes. So that's programmatic in a nutshell, and I think that's useful to set the scene of where I'm taking this presentation to next. Before I do, just wanted to break it up with a couple of quick questions to kind of get your mind focused on the next section, which is looking at your own organization and what you do within it as your role or what you believe your business does. Do you tend to buy the same media channels every year? So you potentially book a big job board contract, or maybe replace that job board contract with, you know, you go from TJ to CV Library or Read or whatever it might be. Are you tracking the performance of the channels that you use? So if you're using the job boards, if you're using Google, if you're using Indeed, are you actually tracking that through to hire or application, or are you still basing things on drop-down menus? And have you backed any of those new channels to market that I referenced earlier, your Zip Recruiters and your talent.coms, etc., or are they just, you've heard about them, but you've maybe not quite dabbled with them just yet? So just a few things to have in mind as we kind of move through the next section. So why programmatic has grown? So we went from traditional stuff in recruitment world, from press, you remember the timeline, and we kind of got to the programmatic era, and we think that kind of grew because current options had a downside of this. There was and still is to an extent, an over-reliance on Indeed for many organizations, and this, far from me to criticize Indeed. You know, we use and work with Indeed an awful lot, and they're a great platform, but obviously there is, as we see as a proportion, an awful big reliance on Indeed from a lot of businesses. Inventory across a lot of the channels available at the moment that most businesses use, so job boards in particular, inventory is very similar to what it was 10, 12 years ago when I first started. It's job postings, CV database, HTML emails, banners. It's very similar stuff, and it's not massively evolved. Payment and success tends to be based on tenure. So you'll be buying a contract for a period of time, or you'll be buying a job listing for a period of time, a month, for example. So you're fixed in how you're buying stuff. Stats from those channels tend to provide you with clicks, not with applications, not with hires. which has, over the years been a drawback or has curbed innovation to some extent. Tracking capabilities by some of those platforms aren't as sophisticated as maybe they need to be, or are difficult to implement sometimes, or it's sometimes beyond the technical ability of the people involved, which again limits yourselves in how much you are able to track and report on performance. And there's often then just a continuous cycle of repeat purchasing. You may be familiar with this. It's just for ease. You're kind of familiar with the channels that you book, and you're worried about if you don't book it, could it all go wrong, and how will that reflect? So I think that's why programmatic kind of took off as it did initially. Was a kind of, as I move into this area, it was a different way of being able to get your employer brand to market, because it was display advertising. You were able to reach passive audiences with your employer brand and not rely on people to be on active channels at the time. But what it did do was it was a kind of a first step into pay per performance for many of us. It certainly was for me. It moved away from, tenure-based stuff where you're just paying for a job credit to, I'm actually only going to pay if somebody clicks on this advert. And that was a real shift in thinking at the time. And it's still a shift that's not infiltrated lots of businesses, because it's still, quite a big shift in mindset. We found, and it's indisputable, that programmatic advertising had enormous influence on other channels that are used. So we're able to see with some of the tracking that we do over at Creed that people who've seen a banner on a certain website, because it's been, we've got a certain person potentially who's in our target audience. We don't know who that person is, but they're in our target audience. And we can see if that person's seen one of our adverts or banners and then goes on to apply through Total Jobs, for example. And so you can kind of get a real sense of how this has influenced other channels. And this has learned and kind of optimizes itself based on performance. So if we see one particular site or one particular demographic, performing really well, it will kind of advertise more to that site or more to that demographic. So it learns as it goes. Now, you're probably asking, why does all this matter? Well, we think that, generic channels have remained largely unchanged and in my view, have contracted when the print shift moved to job boards. Those job boards that were once I was booking years and years ago, they've really reduced now. It's becoming fewer and fewer, and the big generics are where a lot of the businesses move to, and the niche job boards are probably not as strong as they once were potentially. New media players. So again, I'm talking about those pay per performance channels, your Zips and your AdZoonas, etc. They've entered the market. A lot of them are US based, but from what I've seen, what I've heard, media I've spoken to, the take up of that's been relatively tentative. They've not been able to maybe take as much business from Indeed as they would have liked just yet. I know they're working on it. And I think as a result, innovation and then trust in some of these channels, because they're not so widely used, has been lacking a little bit. So there's been a lot of job boards. Indeed has been the mainstay in an awful lot of what businesses are doing in their attraction space. So what we've been looking at amidst all that is, and the reason I've been banging on so much about programmatic so far in this presentation, is how could you use the principles of automation, machine learning, to be able to attract active candidates? Because everything I've talked about there about programmatic was about how you reach passive people who are maybe not interested in, interested is the wrong word, maybe weren't aware of your organization or weren't aware that they wanted a new job or that you were advertising this particular role. That was all very much passive. We're talking about now active. How can we use programmatic principles in active recruitment advertising? And that's the crux of today. We believe we've managed to get the worlds to combine. In fact, we're absolutely certain we've managed to make these worlds combine. So we've been able to take programmatic principles and mix them with pay per performance channels, some that are your traditional PPP channels, so your Indeeds and your Zips, and now some job boards as well, which is the really cool, interesting stuff that I want to talk you through. So we started using a piece of agnostic software. By agnostic, it's not owned by any media or conglomerate or bigger organization. It's completely independent, and it's a piece of software that enables you to advertise any of your roles, any role whatsoever, across professional networks, social media, pay per performance channels. So again, I'm going to keep reiterating things like Zips and AdZoonas and Job Rapidos, and critically now job boards, which is the big change that, you know, we believe is almost a first in the industry at the moment, is the ability to advertise through paid, you know, through programmatic way on job boards. So whilst, and I need to say this because obviously it's very important that not all campaigns and roles do require something as simple as this, which I'll come on to, and they do require more complicated kind of media plan, something a bit more sophisticated. I think this, in the main, for the majority of roles, will change the question, which is, where should we advertise, completely. It will obliterate that question, and I'm going to come on to talk about why now. So in a nutshell, pay per performance, the platform itself scrapes your vacancies from your ATS or your career site into the software. So it just pulls all the different roles through on a simple feed, and they're all available there for us to see in the back. This particular piece of software has access to post on pretty much every channel available that you would have heard of, and that certainly I've heard of, and I've been doing this a little while. And I just wanted to put on the screen now a couple of the publishers or the channels, whichever you want to call it, that it has access to. I've tried to put on some of there that are the most probably familiar to you in different sectors or whatever it may be. But you can see there's a real mix of job boards there and graduate boards and paper performance type channels. So a really nice mix, but there are up to 100 of these that this particular piece of software can reach. And how does it work? Because I think that's really important, that we, you know, simplify how something so different to what has been done before it works. So the platform pulls in the roles, as we've discussed, and we can set goals in the back there and parameters as to which roles to advertise. So what it's not going to do is advertise every role. It's going to advertise ones that we decide that need advertising, because you'll know that some of your roles will just get tons of applications whether you advertise them or not. So this is about the ones that you would normally be putting on a job board or onto Indeed, etc. We agree a number of applications that you want. Or spend. So if, for example, you don't want to spend any more than £20 on advertising that vacancy, you can set a cap. If you don't want any more than 20 applications on that vacancy, you can set a cap. And that is going to be a huge way, when I'm referencing back to the beginning of this presentation, how you can save time and how you can save money, because you can put caps on a role. You can put caps on any role that posts out of a certain department, or you can put caps universally on everything that ever gets posted through this piece of software. It uses its own machine learning to determine where it should advertise that role, because it has a bank of information that it has itself. It learns from what you've done when you've advertised, but also knows from the channels that it's going to put those adverts out onto where it should go. So a contact center role in Luton, it will have had data on that before, and it knows what's performed the best in the past, and it will see the adverts there first. As I've mentioned, it'll stop advertising when you reach your cap, or you can just let the platform go ahead and just work it out for itself. And, you know, we just make sure that there's an overall spend there that it would never go over, so that you're not paying an unreasonable amount for your applications. Benefits of the platform, which are really key, because I'm conscious of time actually, is that it uses programmatic and machine learning. So all that good stuff that I talked about earlier, and the way that product advertising, consumer advertising went into trying to reach people who reaching the right channel at the right time, rather than just, you know, a spray and pray approach. It's using that science and that kind of sophistication in active job seeking. You are now not going to be needing to gamble on fewer channels. You don't need to commit to a couple of job boards, or I need to book on whatever it may be for a month and put a listing up for a month. What we're saying here is you could advertise on effectively an unlimited amount of channels for a much shorter period of time, get your applications in quicker, the quality is not compromised, so your time to hire will reduce, and you're actually diversifying where you're being seen. So actually you're not having to just limit yourselves to one or two job boards, because maybe that's what budget or history has kind of determined. You're only paying per application. This is the biggest change that apart from asking the question, where should I advertise, which I'll come on to again in a moment, The biggest shift is you're only going to pay if you actually get an application, not just by posting. So there's no more paying per credits or paying for sponsoring a listing. This is only pay if someone actually applies, which is huge, and it's a huge shift. Because you can cap applications and costs, it's very transparent. You can log in and see all this. You can see what's performing and when and why. It doesn't require any complex ATS integrations. It's a simple feed, which is brilliant. A little piece of tracking code that goes onto the thank you for applying page is all that's needed from a technical standpoint, which I'm sure most of you listening have already, and I know most of our clients do. So this is just a simple extra piece of code that goes in there. That's as technical as it gets. I've mentioned it reduces time to hire. And for our clients that have used this so far, and for clients of this software that are with other agencies, they've seen a reduction of cost per hire of between 20 and 45%, which is just bonkers. There's nothing else that's changed that reduction since, I don't believe, print moved to job boards. And I think this is why, this is why we're really excited about talking about this today. So quick case study in kind of just explaining then and bringing this to life a little bit more, because I know that's somewhat theoretical and you've not got sight of the platform and how it all looks and all that kind of stuff, but I don't want to bore you with all that kind of thing today. I just want to give you the overall view and then how this has actually worked for one of our clients at the moment. So Hermes, who if you've watched any in-house recruitment presentations by Creed and myself before, we've talked about these a couple of times in the past as a client that have won an awful lot of awards on recruitment effectiveness. They're striving for the lowest possible cost per hire, the sheer volume of 10,000 drivers needed for there. It's just short of this year, but 10,000 drivers needed for peak. Like I've mentioned, reducing cost per hire year on year, even though we have incredibly low cost per hires, is always a massive objective of theirs. And the business is always keen to continually reduce what's needed to be spent, but continually improve performance and often improve number of hires or increased number of hires needed. So we this year said that the only feasible way of doing that would be to implement this, because we believe that from the traditional, these are the channels that you need to advertise on based on the brief. We got that as low as it could go. We'd negotiated with the media. We'd fine-tuned all the media as best we could. We were kind of at our end of how much better we could improve this after about 4 or 5 years of continuous improvement. So the evidence of this so far is that last year, our campaign delivered 14 million impressions, or just over. We gave them over 8,500 hires, which was more than what they'd initially forecast that they'd need. A ton of applications, as you can see, and a cost per hire that was less than we'd again targeted to achieve that year, and had been less than the year before. So already really low numbers, crazy high volume of people needed to be recruited at a low cost. And the question was, how can we improve that again this year? Obviously, pleased to say, or I wouldn't be showing it obviously in this presentation, is that we've put the pay-per-performance platform in place, and we've managed to reduce their cost per application on Indeed, which obviously can run through the platform, by 25%, and on all of their other pay-per-performance sources, so going back to your Talents, your Zips, your Adzunas, we've been able to reduce those by 40% to what that was happening beforehand last year when we'd done it manually. So already those numbers are staggering when you think that they were already low. So to get them that much lower again, proportionately for Hermes is huge. And we're really seeing, well, excited to see what that does for the rest of peak, because we're in the middle of it right now. So to summarize, because I'm just coming up to my 25 minutes, is that you can probably tell from me today that it's incredibly exciting times in recruitment advertising. I don't think, like I say, that there's been a bigger shift in kind of, or a revolution, I guess, since print transition to job boards. So that's why we're so excited that we've got a piece of software that's working, and that we're kind of, we're really kind of trying to lead the way with this, I suppose. There's undoubtedly a shift in how organizations are going to start advertising roles, and the media, we know in the background, are working incredibly hard to keep up with this and to be part of this. And that's, kudos to the media for seeing this as well and wanting to get involved and be part of it. I think the key thing there is it's all about pitting each other against one another. This isn't take our word for it, we're great. This is, we've got to go head to head with other people and prove we are the best, and there's nowhere to hide. It's based on performance, and it's all visible in a dashboard. So it's great for clients, and probably the people here watching, that you've got complete transparency. There are no smoke and mirrors, and that's what I love about this. I'm hoping I've shown you that this is a way that your business can save money, time, and by blushers, I mean, just by staying ahead of the curve. Other organizations are using this. Clients of ours are using this. I know that there are other agencies in conversations with their clients about this. So have this in mind. It's there. Other people are going to be using it, and it is categorically going to change the way that media is purchased. It's certainly in the UK. And critically, really easy to transition. No complicated integrations or anything like that, which I've gone through. You can transition very, very quickly and seamlessly. So final slides from me, which are just, if you want to learn more about this or have a conversation about this at any more length, feel free to email us at hello@creedcomms.co.uk, or I'll do a cheap plug. I'm at dave@creedcomms.co.uk. You can also visit our website, which is there below.